She was sitting alone in the dark, soaking wet, in a wheelchair, and not a single person stopped. The last bus had already left Cedar Falls. The parking lot was empty. The rain hadn't let up in 3 hours. And somewhere inside a warm boardroom 40 miles away, a group of men in expensive suits were pouring themselves drinks, congratulating each other on a problem they believed they had finally solved. They had left her there on purpose. They were counting on the cold, the humiliation, and the silence to finish what a helicopter crash had failed to do. What they never counted on was a man who still believed that some things simply weren't done. If this story already has you leaning forward, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss a story like this one. Give this video a thumbs up if you believe one ordinary person can change another's entire world. And drop a comment below. Tell me your city and country. I read every single one, and I love seeing just how far these stories have traveled. Now settle in, because what happened that night in Cedar Falls is something you will not forget. The storm rolled in off the flatlands the way Iowa storms always did, without apology and without warning. By 8 o'clock that Thursday evening, the rain was coming down so hard it erased the tree line on Route 9. The gas station lights on the edge of town blurred into orange smears. The few cars still out drove slowly, their wipers working fast, their drivers hunched forward over steering wheels, anxious to get home. Noah Carter was one of those drivers. He had his heater running on high, his work jacket balled up on the passenger seat, and a cold cup of coffee sitting in the cup holder he kept meaning to drink. He was tired in the specific bone-deep way that comes not from doing too much in one day, but from doing too much for too many days in a row, without rest. His hands on the wheel were calloused and scarred across the knuckles. The kind of hands that fix things for a living, not the kind that typed reports or shook hands at boardroom tables. He was 32 years old. He had a 7-year-old daughter at home named Ava, currently being watched by his neighbor, Mrs. Paulson, who charged $12 an hour and always fell asleep on the couch by 9. He had a busted water heater he hadn't had the money to replace yet. He had a list of work orders on his phone he needed to finish by Friday morning. And he had exactly half a tank of gas. He was not looking for anything else to deal with tonight. That was when he saw her. At first he almost missed it, just a shape at the edge of his headlights, near the old transit shelter on the corner of Route 9 and Mill Creek Road. His brain filed it as a piece of equipment someone had left out. A generator, maybe. A pile of lumber wrapped in a tarp. Then the shape moved. Noah slowed without really deciding to. He pulled his truck to the shoulder and squinted through the rain-streaked windshield. It was a wheelchair, and sitting in it was a woman. She was completely alone. No car parked nearby. No umbrella. No overhang above her. The old transit shelter's roof had collapsed years ago and never been repaired, leaving only 2 rusted metal posts standing in the dirt like a monument to something nobody cared about anymore. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her head slightly bowed, rain pouring off her in sheets. She was wearing a dark business coat, the expensive kind with structured shoulders, now so waterlogged it had lost all its shape. Her hair was plastered flat against her face. She wasn't waving. She wasn't calling out. She wasn't doing anything at all. Noah sat there for a moment with his foot on the brake. He thought about Ava. He thought about Mrs. Paulson falling asleep. He thought about the $12 an hour. He pulled off the road and got out of the truck. The rain hit him instantly and fully, the way it does when you've been inside a warm vehicle. No transition, just soaked. He jogged across the gravel shoulder, his boots cracking through shallow puddles, and reached the shelter in about 15 seconds. Up close, she was younger than he'd expected. Maybe his age, maybe a little younger. Dark hair, dark eyes. A face that would have been composed and controlled under different circumstances. You could see it in the set of her jaw, in the way her shoulders hadn't entirely collapsed even now. But there were red marks around her wrists where the wheelchair armrest had been pressing for a long time. And she was shivering, badly. "Hey," Noah said, not particularly eloquent, just "hey." She looked up at him. Her expression was difficult to read, not frightened, not relieved, more like someone calculating how much this was going to cost her. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice came out steady, barely. Noah looked around the empty road, then back at her. "Last bus through here was at 6:30. I'm aware. It's after 8. I can tell time." He almost said something. Instead, he pushed his wet hair off his forehead and crouched down so he was at her eye level. He had daughters. He knew when someone was pretending not to need help. "Is there someone coming to get you?" A pause. Too long to be casual. "Yes," she said. "Who?" Another pause. Shorter this time, but emptier. The rain picked up. A truck blew past on Route 9 and sprayed a fine mist of road water across both of them. She flinched slightly, but didn't change her expression. Noah stood up. "I've got a truck. It's warm. If someone's coming, you can wait inside it." "I know you don't need it," he said. Not unkindly, just matter of fact. "I'm offering it anyway." She looked at him for a long moment. There was something in her eyes that was hard to name. Not fear, not gratitude, not suspicion exactly. It was the look of someone who had stopped expecting things from other people and was now being forced to revise that assumption and didn't fully trust the process. "I don't know you," she said. "Noah Carter." He held out his hand. "I fix industrial equipment. I've got a daughter named Ava who's 7 and currently being watched by a 63-year-old woman who is definitely asleep right now. I'm not interesting enough to be a threat." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but close to it. The way a window looks when someone's moved behind the glass. Just a shadow of a change. "Victoria," she said, and shook his hand. Her grip was firm, deliberate, like someone who'd spent years in rooms where how you shook hands told people who you were. "Just Victoria?" "For now." Fair enough, he figured. Getting the wheelchair up into the truck bed required some awkward maneuvering and a strap he dug out from behind the rear seat, and Victoria directed him through it with the clipped precision of someone accustomed to telling people what to do, though she kept her voice carefully neutral, like she was tamping something down. He noticed she didn't apologize for the inconvenience. She didn't explain herself. She just guided him through what needed doing and left the rest alone. He helped her into the passenger seat. She managed most of it herself, her arms strong in a way that surprised him. Wheelchair users often were, he'd learned, from exactly nowhere because he'd never had reason to know. And he only put his hand out once when she nearly lost her balance transferring across, and she grabbed it without comment and let go the moment she didn't need it anymore. The truck cab was cramped. The heater blew old-smelling warm air. His work jacket was on the seat between them, and he threw it in the back. He pulled onto Route 9 and drove. "You want me to call someone?" he asked after a minute. "No." "The police?" "If someone was supposed to—" "No police," she said. Flat, definitive. He glanced at her. She was staring straight ahead through the windshield, both hands in her lap, watching the road the way people watch things when they're thinking about something entirely different. "Okay," he said. Another mile passed. Rain on the roof. The wipers going back and forth. "Where are you headed?" he asked. A long beat. "I don't know," she said. He didn't push it. He drove. What Victoria Sinclair did not tell him, what she would not tell anyone, not that night, not for a long time, was that the people supposed to collect her from that bus stop had been her own board of directors. She had built Sinclair Global from a mid-sized regional tech firm into one of the most aggressive and successful infrastructure software companies in the country. 12 years of 18-hour days, of canceled vacations, of relationships that dissolved because she was always in an airport or on a call or restructuring a failing division that nobody else believed in. She had done things that people in her industry said couldn't be done by someone her age, her background, her gender. She had done them anyway. And then, 8 months ago, she had been in a helicopter that went down over the Cascades. The official report said mechanical failure. The NTSB investigation was ongoing. The pilot had not survived. Victoria had survived, but barely, and the damage to her spinal cord had been severe enough that when she came out of surgery in a Seattle hospital, the neurologist had used the words realistic expectations in a tone that told her everything she needed to know about his actual expectations. She had listened to him without expression and then asked for a notepad so she could start writing down what needed to happen at the company while she was recovering. What she didn't know, what she had spent 8 months not knowing, was that the helicopter had not gone down because of mechanical failure. What she didn't know was that while she lay in that hospital bed writing memos about quarterly projections, her most trusted executives were quietly meeting without her, quietly reclassifying assets, quietly restructuring governance documents, quietly preparing for a world in which Victoria Sinclair was no longer able to run the company she had built. What she didn't know was that the emergency board meeting she had been summoned to that Thursday evening, driven to a location 40 miles from Cedar Falls, transferred to a transit stop on a back road, and left there with the assurance that a car was coming, had not been an emergency meeting at all. It had been a disposal. They had needed her present long enough to manufacture her signature on 2 documents. They had gotten what they needed. And then Marcus Webb, the man she had promoted to COO 8 years ago, the man who had stood at her hospital bedside and told her the company was in good hands, had looked at the driver and given a very small nod, and Victoria had been left at a bus stop in the rain while men who had stolen everything from her drove away in warm cars to warm houses to celebrate. She sat in Noah Carter's truck and felt the heat from the vents and said nothing. She had nothing to say. She had no phone. They'd taken it during the meeting, citing company security protocol. She had no purse. She had the clothes she was wearing, the wheelchair, and approximately $60 in her coat pocket. And she had spent 2 hours in the rain talking herself out of crying because she was not going to cry. She was not going to flag down a stranger and beg for help. She was going to sit there until she figured out her next move, because that was what she did. That was the only thing she had ever known how to do. She had not figured out the next move when Noah's headlights swept across her, so he drove back towards Cedar Falls and pulled up in front of a small house on a residential street. The porch light was on. Through the front window, she could see blue TV light flickering. "My neighbor's inside," he said, turning off the engine. "She'll go home once I'm back. I've got a guest room. It's nothing special, but it's dry, and the bed's decent." Victoria looked at the house. It was small and a little worn, paint peeling along the eaves, a pair of small rubber boots by the front steps, a child's plastic bicycle locked to the porch railing. But there were window boxes with dormant flowers in them, which meant someone had planted them in spring expecting to be here in fall. "I'll be fine," she said. "You don't have anywhere to go," Noah said. Not unkindly, just a fact, offered plainly. She opened her mouth, closed it. "One night," he said. "Then we figure out what comes next." She hated the word we. She had not had a we in a very long time. She was not sure she knew what to do with it. But the rain was still hammering the roof of the truck, and she was still cold and her hands were still shaking slightly. And she was tired. She was so deeply tired, in a way that she did not like to admit even to herself. "One night," she said. Inside, Mrs. Paulson was indeed asleep in the armchair, a game show playing at low volume, her reading glasses still on. She woke with a start when the door opened and took in Noah, the soaking wet woman in the wheelchair, and whatever expression was on Noah's face, and said only, "I'll let myself out," and collected her coat and keys with the efficient tact of a woman who had seen enough of life not to require explanations. Ava appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas. Small and bright-eyed, her dark hair and lopsided pigtails, she'd clearly done herself, a stuffed rabbit hanging from one hand. "Dad, you're all wet," she announced. "Yeah." "Who's that?" "This is Victoria. She's going to stay in the guest room tonight." Ava came down the stairs slowly, studying Victoria with the unfiltered assessment that only children under about age 10 are still capable of. Victoria, who had been evaluated by investors and journalists and government regulators, sat still and let herself be looked at. "Your wheels are cool," Ava said finally. Something in Victoria's chest moved in a way she wasn't expecting. "Thank you." "Can I ride it?" "Ava," Noah said. "Later, maybe," Victoria said, "when it's not the middle of the night." Ava accepted this with complete satisfaction and went back upstairs. And that was that. The guest room was small, with a twin bed and a dresser and a window that looked out over a wet backyard. Noah had brought in a spare towel and dug out a dry sweatshirt that was too big for her, apologizing for it without making a big deal of the apology, and then left her alone. She sat in her wheelchair next to the bed for a while, listening to the house settle into quiet. She heard Noah moving around in the kitchen, heard the click of a light switch, then nothing. She transferred herself into the bed in the dark, the way she had learned to do over 8 months of practice, mechanically, carefully, without fuss, the same way she had learned to do everything since the accident. She lay on her back and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. Outside, the rain was beginning to ease. She thought about Marcus Webb's face when he'd shaken her hand at the end of that meeting. The way his smile had been just slightly too wide, just slightly too held. She had noticed it. She had noticed it and filed it under things to think about later, because she had been managing a full board meeting while managing the logistics of her own body, which required its own constant management now. And she had not had bandwidth left for doubting a man she had trusted for a decade. She should have doubted him. She should have doubted all of them. Her jaw tightened. She felt the old familiar pressure behind her sternum that meant anger. Real anger, not the performative kind she sometimes deployed in negotiations, but the cold, dense, structural kind that didn't burn out. The kind that became something else over time, if you let it. She was going to let it. But first she had to figure out where she was. She had to find a phone. She had to contact the one or two people in her life she still trusted, figure out what had already been signed, what had already been filed, what could still be contested, and what couldn't. She had to take an inventory of damage the way she had always taken inventory of damage, methodically, without flinching, room by room, until she knew exactly what she was working with. She had rebuilt things before. She would rebuild this. She closed her eyes. The ceiling fan above her clicked quietly on its mount, slightly off balance, making a soft rhythmic sound. She was asleep within 4 minutes. She did not dream. Down the hall, in a house that smelled like motor oil and dish soap and a child's strawberry shampoo, Noah Carter checked on his daughter, turned off the porch light, and lay down in his own bed staring at the same ceiling he'd been staring at for 4 years, wondering what exactly he had brought through his front door. He didn't have an answer. He fell asleep wondering. She was still asleep when Ava decided to introduce herself properly. Noah found out about this the way he found out about most things Ava did. After the fact, when the situation had already developed past the point of intervention. He had been in the kitchen frying eggs and listening to the morning weather report on the counter radio when he heard small feet padding down the hallway toward the guest room, and by the time he turned around, Ava was already gone. He stood there with a spatula in his hand for about 3 seconds, weighing his options, and then turned the burner down and followed. The guest room door was partially open. He stopped in the hallway and looked through the gap. Ava was sitting cross-legged on the floor next to Victoria's wheelchair, which was parked beside the bed. She had her stuffed rabbit in her lap and she was talking, quietly, for Ava, which meant she was using her indoor voice instead of her outdoor voice, which she often confused. Victoria was sitting up in bed, her dark hair loose and still slightly damp from the night before, wearing Noah's old gray sweatshirt. She looked like she hadn't slept particularly well, or maybe she was just one of those people who took a while to come fully online in the morning. And my dad fixed a combine once that was on fire, Ava was saying, like actually on fire. He put it out with a blanket. That sounds dangerous, Victoria said. He does dangerous stuff all the time, but he says it's not dangerous because he knows what he's doing. But I think he just says that. That's very perceptive. Ava considered this. What's perceptive? It means you notice things other people miss. Ava seemed to like that. She shifted the rabbit in her lap. Why do you have a wheelchair? Noah winced slightly in the hallway, but Victoria didn't flinch. She looked at Ava with the same level expression she seemed to apply to most things. Because my legs don't work the way they used to. Did you fall? Something like that. My dad fell off a roof once and broke his wrist. He didn't cry, though. He said it was fine, but Grandma said he cried in the car. I believe your grandmother. Did you cry? A pause. A little. That's okay, Ava said, with the simple authority of a 7-year-old. My mom cried sometimes too. Dad said that doesn't mean anything is wrong with you. The hallway got very quiet. Noah stood very still. Victoria looked at Ava carefully. Where's your mom? She died. When I was 3, so I don't really remember. Dad has pictures, though. He keeps one in his wallet, but he doesn't know I know. She tilted her head. Do you have a mom? Yes, she lives far away. Do you miss her? Something crossed Victoria's face that Noah couldn't fully name. Not grief exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that had been packed away for a long time and was bumping against the lid. Sometimes, she said. Noah knocked on the door frame and pushed it open. Ava, what did we say about bothering people in the morning? You said don't. Right. But she was already awake. Still. Ava looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Ava. Some wordless exchange passed between them that completely excluded Noah. She can stay, Victoria said. Noah looked at his daughter, who gave him the expression she had apparently inherited from no one he could identify, because he had never made a face like that in his life. The one that was simply and utterly certain it had already won. He went back to the kitchen and finished the eggs. Over breakfast, Victoria ate with the focused efficiency of someone who normally ate alone at a desk. She held the fork the way people do when they've spent years taking meals in meetings, as a tool rather than a ritual. She said the eggs were good. She meant it. Noah could tell, because when people were just being polite, they looked at you when they said it, and she was looking at her plate. "I need to use a phone," she said, after a few minutes. Noah pushed his across the table without comment. She looked at it, then at him. He got up and went to the back door and stepped outside under the porch overhang, even though it wasn't raining anymore, because she clearly needed the space. He could hear Ava inside explaining to Victoria exactly how the toaster worked and why it was untrustworthy. He stayed outside for about 10 minutes. When he came back in, Victoria was holding the phone in her lap with both hands, and her face had changed. Not collapsed, not crumpled the way faces do when someone's crying, but tightened in the way that happens when bad news confirms what you already suspected and the confirmation is somehow still a blow. She set the phone on the table and pushed it back toward him. "Thank you," she said. He sat down across from her. He didn't ask. He waited. "I need to stay one more day," she said. If that's all right. "Okay. I'll pay you." "You don't have to pay me." "I want to." "I don't have anything to charge you for." She looked at him with an expression that was part frustration, part something else. The look of someone accustomed to every transaction having terms, finding the absence of terms somehow harder to accept than a price. Noah. Victoria. She pressed her lips together. Ava, oblivious and cheerful, was putting her plate in the sink in the noisy way that small children put things in sinks. "One more day," Victoria said finally. "Sure," Noah said. "You want more coffee?" She looked at her cup. "Yes." He got up and poured it. One day became two. Two became four. It wasn't a decision, exactly. It was more like a series of small practical facts that kept stacking up and making departure impractical. Victoria needed to reach certain people, and certain people were difficult to reach and required multiple attempts. Then there was the issue of where she would go, which she didn't discuss directly, but which was evidently complicated. Then Ava got a mild fever on the third day and missed school, and Victoria, who was parked in the living room with a legal pad she'd asked Noah to buy her, making notes in handwriting so small and dense it looked like code, ended up reading to her for 45 minutes while Noah drove to the pharmacy, because Ava had asked her to and Victoria had said yes before thinking about it, and then apparently decided not to take it back. Noah came home to find his daughter asleep on the couch, with her head about 6 inches from Victoria's wheel, and Victoria very carefully not moving so as not to wake her, still holding the book, looking at Ava's sleeping face with an expression that was completely unguarded in a way her face almost never was. She heard him come in and looked up, and the expression closed like a door. "She went out about 10 minutes ago," Victoria said. "She does that." He set the pharmacy bag on the counter. "You didn't have to do that." She asked. "You could have said no." Victoria looked at the book in her hands. It was a children's chapter book, something about a mouse who wanted to be an engineer. She set it on the side table. "I know," she said. He didn't push it. Oh. She didn't volunteer much about herself, and he didn't ask. This was partly because he was not naturally a pushy person, and partly because he'd grown up around enough private people to understand that silence isn't always avoidance. Sometimes it's just how people process things, in their own interior rooms with the door shut, and opening the door before they're ready doesn't help. It just makes a mess. What he did learn, in fragments, through the course of those first few days, she didn't sleep well. He could tell because on the second night he got up at 2 in the morning for a glass of water and saw the light under the guest room door, and again on the third night. She never mentioned it. She had strong opinions about coffee. She took it black and she took it seriously. And when he tried to offer her the flavored stuff his mother had left in the cupboard, she had looked at it with the expression of someone being offered something technically legal but fundamentally objectionable. She was very good at pretending she was fine. This was perhaps the most obvious thing about her, and also somehow the easiest to miss, because she was genuinely competent at it. The posture straight, the voice level, the eyes clear. Only occasionally did something slip through. A pause that lasted a half second too long when she thought no one was watching. A stillness in her hand sometimes, when she was staring at something that wasn't actually in the room. She never talked about the wheelchair, what had happened, why, when. He noticed her doing the physical maintenance of it without thinking, in the practiced automatic way you do things that have become part of your daily routine, whether you chose them or not. She was strong in her upper body. She maneuvered through the tight spaces of his small house with a matter-of-fact efficiency that told him she had been doing this long enough to stop seeing the obstacles. What she didn't have was anyone coming to get her. That was the thing that sat in the back of his mind on day 3 and day 4, when he was driving to a job and when he was eating lunch in his truck and when he was lying in bed at night. Whatever phone calls she was making on his cell phone, they did not appear to be producing anyone who was driving to Cedar Falls to collect her. He didn't know why. He didn't know what kind of life produced a person who ended up stranded at a bus stop in the rain with apparently no one available to come for her. But he knew it was not a simple story, and he knew she wasn't going to tell it to him in any hurry. He thought about asking. He decided against it every time. He did once say, on the 4th evening, while he was washing dishes, and she was at the kitchen table with her legal pad, "You doing okay?" She didn't look up from the pad. "Yes?" "Okay." A pause. The faucet ran. "Are you worried I'm a problem?" she asked. "No." "You can say if I'm a problem." "You're not a problem." She looked up then and studied him with the particular attention she gave things she was trying to assess. He kept washing the dish. He was used to being looked at like that by now. "Why aren't you asking me more questions?" she said. He thought about it honestly. "Because I figure you'll tell me what you want to tell me." "Most people can't help themselves." "I'm not most people." She looked at him a moment longer, then went back to her notes. After a while, she said, "I owned a company. It was taken from me. I'm trying to get it back." She said it the same way she might report a weather condition, flat, direct, no color. Then she went back to writing. Noah dried his hands on the dish towel. "Okay," he said. She looked up. Something in her expression was slightly confused by the okay, like she'd braced for more and he hadn't delivered it. He could see her recalibrating. "That's it?" she said. "You want me to ask something?" "Most people would ask something." "What do you want me to ask?" She opened her mouth, closed it. For just a second, something in her face was almost uncertain, which was such an unfamiliar look on her that it was startling, like seeing a building you know well from a new angle. "Nothing," she said. "It's fine." He went back to drying dishes. The clock on the microwave ticked over from 7:58 to 7:59. "It was a technology company," she said. "Infrastructure software. I started it 12 years ago. It's worth about $4 billion right now, depending on the market." Noah set down the dish towel. He leaned against the counter and looked at her. "The people who run it while I've been recovering orchestrated having me sign documents under false pretenses. They've now filed with the board claiming I voluntarily stepped down due to incapacity." She was still using the same weather report voice, but her hand around the pen had tightened. They had been planning it for months, maybe longer. "That's a crime," he said. "Several crimes, yes." "So why not? The police?" A short, hard sound that was almost a laugh. "My lawyers are working on it. I had a phone call this morning with the one person on my legal team I still trust. There are federal investigators who have been looking at financial irregularities at my company for the last 6 months, which I didn't know about until now." She paused. "Which means someone knew something was wrong before I did." "The investigators or the people doing it?" She looked at him. "That's the right question." "You don't know yet." "No." She set down the pen, rubbed her right hand, the one that had been gripping it. "I need about 72 more hours to establish what's been filed, what can be challenged, and where the documentation is." She looked up at him and said what he could tell she had been working herself up to saying for a while. "I know this is not what you signed up for. I know you drove past a bus stop in the rain and ended up with a situation that has nothing to do with your life. If you want me to, Victoria." She stopped. "I've got a guest room," he said. "It's not doing anything." A long pause. 72 hours is fine," he said. She looked at him in that assessing way again. Then she picked up the pen. "Thank you," she said. And he could tell, because of how she said it, quiet, with no performance to it, not the reflexive courtesy kind, but the kind that costs something, that she didn't say it easily. What happened on the fifth morning was an accident, a genuine one. Noah had been doing laundry, or rather, he had been attempting to do laundry in the specific way that constitutes doing laundry. When you are a single father who is also behind on 3 work orders and whose daughter's school library book is 2 weeks overdue, which is to say, he was moving things from one basket to another and calling it progress. He had pulled the cushion off Victoria's wheelchair. It had gotten wet and needed to dry, and set it on the kitchen table and gone to the other room to look for Ava's missing library book, which had last been seen under the couch and was now nowhere under the couch. He was on his hands and knees behind the coffee table when he heard a rustling in the kitchen, and he called out, "Ava, don't touch the wheelchair cushion. It's still wet." And Ava called back, "I'm not, it fell." And he said, "Just leave it," and went back to looking for the book. He found it behind the radiator, covered in dust, and he was standing in the hallway brushing it off when he noticed that the cushion had indeed fallen, and in falling had apparently displaced the thin foam interior slightly, because there was a gap along the bottom edge of the outer cover, and in the gap, folded very small, so small they'd been invisible against the fabric, were papers. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, just stood there. Then he walked to the table and looked more closely. They were folded pages, printed in small type, dense with language that even from a distance looked distinctly legal. He could see through the top fold a header that read, "Sinclair Global Inc., and below it, in smaller type, Board Resolution, Voluntary Executive Transition, Governance Transfer. He didn't pick them up. He stood and looked at them for what felt like a long time, but was probably about 15 seconds. Then he heard the wheelchair coming down the hallway. Victoria rolled into the kitchen and stopped. Her eyes went to the cushion, to the papers visible in the gap, to Noah's face. The silence in the room changed texture. "I can explain," she said. "You don't have to explain anything to me." His voice came out level, which surprised him because what was moving around in his chest was not particularly level. "These must have been there when I picked you up." "Yes. They're what you signed at the meeting." A pause. "Some of them. Copies." She moved closer and reached down and pressed the foam back into place, covering the papers, with a calm that looked like it required some effort to maintain. "I managed to take photos with a phone before they took it, then printed them at the library." She stopped, recalibrated. "I was waiting until I had more pieces before I explained all of this." "I'm not upset," he said. "You look upset." "I'm not upset at you." He pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down, because standing suddenly felt like too much. "You're not a woman who lost everything." "I didn't say that I was." He thought back. She was right. She hadn't said it. She had just let him assume it, the way a person can tell a story by choosing which questions not to answer. He supposed that was fair. They'd been strangers. He looked up at her. $4 billion. Approximately. And they just took it. "They're trying to." Something in her jaw. "They haven't succeeded yet." He rubbed the back of his neck. Outside, he could hear Ava in the backyard, talking to herself the way she did when she was making up stories. A high, ongoing murmur, full of drama. The washing machine chugged in the other room. "Are you in danger?" he asked. She held his gaze. "Probably." He'd expected hedging. The directness landed differently. "From who?" "The men who orchestrated this aren't going to be comfortable with me being out there, mobile, making phone calls to federal investigators." She said it as a fact. She didn't reach for drama. That, he thought, was somehow the most alarming part. The way she said it the same way someone might say the weather looks rough. "They believed I had no resources and no allies and nowhere to go," which, as of last week, was largely accurate. "And now?" She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite warmth, but something near it. The way a room feels when a window's been cracked and the air moves. "Now I have 72 hours in a guest room," she said. Noah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You should probably tell me the rest of it." She studied him for a long beat, long enough that he thought she might not. Then she set her hands on her wheels and turned slightly, angling toward the table. Settling in, he realized. Settling in to actually talk. "The helicopter crash wasn't an accident," she said. The washing machine kept chugging. Ava's murmur continued in the yard. The clock on the microwave clicked over. "Tell me," he said, and she did. It took a long time. She talked the way she did everything, precisely, in order, without decoration, but also without the emotional flatness that sometimes sounds like not caring. It became clear, as she spoke, that she cared enormously, that the controlled delivery was the container for something that was not controlled at all underneath, and that the container was doing real work. The helicopter had gone down in the Cascades on a clear morning in February. She had been traveling to inspect a server installation. The pilot, a man named Grant Haller, who had flown for Sinclair Global for 6 years, had been dead before impact. The autopsy had found traces of a fast-acting cardiac agent in his bloodstream that had been classified in the initial investigation as naturally occurring. One of the federal investigators she had spoken to that morning, a woman named Carver, who had apparently been building a case against Sinclair's board for financial fraud and had been watching the company for months, believed the classification had been influenced. Influenced how? Noah had asked. Someone talked to someone. Money or leverage, I don't know which yet. She'd set down the pen. Grant had a wife and 2 kids. He's been dead for 8 months, and everyone believes it was a heart attack. Noah had said nothing for a moment. Then, they killed the pilot. To put the helicopter down, yes. And you were supposed to die in it, yes. But you didn't. I was behind him and slightly insulated by the cargo equipment. The crash was bad, but survivable for me. They didn't plan on that. Her voice stayed flat, but something behind her eyes was not flat at all. The spinal damage was genuine. The recovery has been... She paused, selected something. Difficult. They used that difficulty to make their move. Who specifically? Marcus Webb, my COO. I promoted him 8 years ago. I trusted him with things I didn't trust anyone else with. She stopped. For the first time since she'd started talking, something in her posture changed. A very small, almost invisible shift, but he caught it. A tightening in the shoulders that looked like the physical residue of a feeling she'd been carrying for months. He ran everything while I was in the hospital. I called him every other day. He came to see me twice. He brought me flowers the second time. A pause. Lilies. He knew I hated lilies. He brought them anyway. Noah looked at her. Small thing, she said, but I kept thinking about it. Not that small, he said. She met his eyes. For a second, just a second, her expression was simply a person's expression, without the management layer over it, raw and tired and real. No, she said. Not that small. She named the others too. There were 4 core conspirators beyond Webb, a man named Philip Doyle, who was the CFO and had been reclassifying assets under holding structures that technically didn't yet belong to Sinclair Global, a board member named Rothschild, who had been the one to call the Thursday meeting, a woman named Carla Nguyen in legal, who had prepared the documents Victoria had been tricked into signing, and a man Noah had never heard of named David Sauter, who apparently moved money between entities and left very little trace. She knew all of this, or most of it, because she was good at her job, and her job had always required understanding exactly where the money went and exactly who had the access to move it. She had spent 8 months paralyzed in hospital rooms and rehabilitation centers, and she had spent much of that time reading documents on a tablet and making notes that she didn't share with anyone, because something had been wrong, and she couldn't locate the wrongness, but she knew it was there, the way you can smell rain before it arrives. She just hadn't known how wrong. The documents I signed Thursday, she said. One was a voluntary resignation as CEO and board chair. The other was a proxy assignment transferring voting rights over my founder's shares to a governance committee, which Webb controls. Can those be challenged? Yes. If I can prove duress, coercion, and fraud, which is what the copies under the cushion are for. And if I can establish that I didn't go willingly, and if Carver's investigation moves fast enough that they can't complete the asset reclassification before it's frozen. So the timeline matters. Everything is about the timeline. Her voice had changed, sharper now, more focused, the legal pad voice. This was what she looked like, he thought, when she was actually working. They'll be looking for me. When they find out I wasn't just sitting at that bus stop in the rain until I gave up. When they realize I have the copies, that I've been in contact with Carver, that I'm not... She stopped. Not what? Not finished, she said. Outside, Ava's murmur had gone quiet. A moment later, her face appeared at the back door screen. Dad, the Henderson's cat is in our yard again. Leave it alone. It's just sitting there. Ava? What if it's hungry? Then it will go home and eat. He turned back to Victoria. Sorry. She was watching the door where Ava had disappeared back into the yard. Something in her expression was difficult to identify. It wasn't amusement exactly, or not only that. She doesn't stop, does she? Victoria said. No, never has. How do you... She seemed to think better of the question. How do I what? How do you do all of this alone? It wasn't quite a question, more like something she'd been observing for 5 days and had finally said out loud. He thought about it honestly. I don't think about it that way. I just do whatever's next. That sounds exhausting. Sometimes, but you don't really have the option of standing still. She was quiet for a moment. Then quietly, no, I suppose you don't. He thought she might be talking about more than just parenthood. That night, after Ava was in bed and the house had gone quiet, Noah was in the garage working on a small engine he'd promised to look at for a neighbor when he heard a knock on the garage door frame. Victoria had wheeled herself out through the back door, the one with the lower threshold he'd propped open for her on the second day without comment. She was in the doorway, still in the gray sweatshirt, her legal pad in her lap. You need something? He said, not looking up from the engine. No. A pause. I couldn't sleep. There's coffee in the kitchen if you want it. I made some. He glanced up. She was watching him work with the particular attention she gave things she was genuinely interested in, focused, not polite. He went back to the engine. After a while, she said, You do this every night? Not every night, when I've got a backlog. You like it? Yeah. Why? He thought about it, wiped his hands on a rag. Because it either works or it doesn't. No gray area. You figure out what's wrong, you fix it, and then it works. He set down the wrench. Most things aren't like that. She was quiet for a moment. No, she said. They're not. He picked the wrench back up. The garage smelled like oil and cold concrete, and faintly, the coffee she'd brought out in a mug she was holding in her lap. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't require management. He was on the second bolt when she said, without particular inflection, I haven't told anyone what I told you today, not in that much detail. He looked up. Not my lawyers. Not Carver. She was looking at the engine, not at him. I've been managing information very carefully, what to say to whom, and how much. She paused. I don't entirely know why I told you. He thought about that. Maybe because I didn't ask. She looked at him. People who want something from you ask questions, he said. They need information. They're building something. She was quiet for a moment. And you're not building anything. I fixed your truck cushion and made you eggs, he said. That's about the extent of it. Something happened in her expression that was not quite a smile but was the closest thing to one he'd seen from her. Genuine, unmanaged, there for just a second before it was gone. Thank you, she said. For the second time that day, with the same weight behind it. He nodded, went back to the engine. She sat in the doorway and drank her coffee and watched him work. And neither of them said anything else for a long time, and it was the kind of quiet that doesn't feel like silence at all. It was nearly midnight when Noah finally set down his tools and began wiping them clean, and it was then, just as Victoria was turning to go back inside, that the pair of headlights appeared at the end of the street. Slow, moving with the careful pace of a vehicle looking for an address. They both saw it. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The car slowed further as it reached Noah's house, and for a long second its light swept the front window. And then it kept moving, continued down the block, and disappeared around the corner. Noah stood with the rag in his hands. Victoria had gone very still in the doorway. Could be anyone, he said. Yes, she said. But neither of them believed it, and the quiet that followed was nothing like the one before. Neither of them slept much that night. Noah knew this because he lay awake listening to the house, the way he used to do in the months after his wife died, tracking every small sound, the furnace kicking on, a car passing outside, the particular creak of the third floorboard in the hallway that meant Ava was up. Old habit. He'd thought he'd broken it somewhere around the 2-year mark, when the hypervigilance finally started to loosen its grip, and he could sleep through an entire night without cataloging every noise. But it came back easily. That was the thing about those kinds of habits. They never fully left. They just waited. The light under Victoria's door stayed on until past 2. He got up once, around 1:30, and stood in the hallway outside her room. Not to knock, just to stand there for a moment, aware of her being awake on the other side of the door, and aware that she probably knew she wasn't the only one awake, and aware that neither of them was going to say anything about it. He went back to bed and stared at the ceiling until somewhere around 3, when he finally dropped off into the thin, unsatisfying sleep of someone who has rested without actually recovering. In the morning, Victoria was already at the kitchen table when he came downstairs, her legal pad open, the coffee pot down to its last inch. She had dark circles she wasn't trying to hide, and her jaw had the tight set of someone who had made decisions in the night and was living with them now. "The car came back," she said before he'd reached the counter. He stopped. "When?" "Around 4. I was at the window." She kept her eyes on the pad. It slowed down again, same as before. Didn't stop, kept going. He poured the last of the coffee and leaned against the counter. The morning was gray outside, the light flat and winter thin. Could still be someone from the neighborhood, someone who works nights. Same car, same speed, same spot. She looked up. "It's not the neighborhood." He didn't argue with her. She knew what she was dealing with better than he did. "How long do you think before they figure out exactly where you are?" he asked. "They may already know." She said it with a steady he was starting to recognize, the steadiness that cost her something, that she maintained by choice rather than by ease. "I used your phone. My lawyer's phone is not secure, which means anyone monitoring her communications knows she's spoken to a Cedar Falls number. It wouldn't take a long time to run that down." He set down the coffee mug. "Okay?" "Okay?" she repeated, and the word sounded different in her mouth than it did in his. Not dismissive, but surprised, like she kept expecting something other than okay and kept getting it and still hadn't adjusted. "I need to call Carver," she said. "Today, the investigator. I've been holding back because I wasn't sure how much I could trust the channel, but we're past that point. Use my phone." "Your phone is already flagged." "Then what? I need a different phone. Prepaid, something unconnected to either of us." She was already writing on the pad. "There's a gas station on Route 12 that sells them. I've seen the sign." He looked at her. "You've been planning this." "I've been planning this since the second day." She didn't sound defensive about it, just factual. "I wasn't going to tell you until I had to." "And now you have to." "And now I have to." He picked up his keys from the hook by the door. "I'll go this morning before Ava's up." She opened her mouth, and he could see the shape of what she was going to say, the reflex of a woman who had spent a lifetime not needing things from people, the automatic protest forming. And he said, "Don't," not harshly, just firmly, the way you say it to someone you've been watching fight their own better judgment for a week. She closed her mouth. "I'll be back in 20 minutes, he said. I was back in 18. He set the prepaid phone on the table in front of her without ceremony, still in the packaging, and went to get Ava up for school. The morning routine was its own kind of controlled chaos. Ava couldn't find one of her shoes for a solid 10 minutes, then found it in the refrigerator and could not explain why, then decided she urgently needed to tell Victoria something about a dream she'd had involving a talking horse before Noah physically redirected her toward the door. Victoria, who was on the prepaid phone by then, with her back slightly turned, listened to approximately 45 seconds of the talking horse story before holding up one finger without turning around, which Ava somehow understood as hold on rather than go away, and waited with genuine patience until Victoria had finished the call and turned back. "Was the horse friendly?" Victoria asked. "Yes, but he could only talk backwards," Ava said. "That's inconvenient." "I know. Dad, we're going to be late." They were not going to be late. But Noah got her coat and her backpack and her correctly matched shoes and took her out to the truck. And when he came back 15 minutes later, Victoria's expression had changed again. The legal pad steadiness was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. Keyed up, electric, the look of someone who has received information that has changed the shape of what they're dealing with. "Carver moved up the timeline," Victoria said. Noah sat down across from her. "What does that mean?" "It means the financial fraud investigation has been in progress for 6 months, and they are significantly further along than I knew. There are sealed indictments being prepared. The asset reclassification that Webb has been running. They've been tracking it. They have documentation I don't have." She was speaking faster now, Not frantically, but with the momentum of someone whose plan had just found traction. And it means that the people who are looking for me are also people who are about to be arrested, which makes them considerably more dangerous in the short term because they have nothing left to lose by being aggressive. Noah looked at her steadily. How aggressive? She met his eyes. Carver thinks they'll try to get a final signature from me, something that completes the asset transfer before the freeze order goes through. If they can file it within the next 48 hours, even a fraud finding may not reverse the transfer quickly enough to prevent real damage. She paused. They need me to sign one more document, and they know I'm somewhere in Cedar Falls. So they come here. If they can locate exactly where, yes. She looked at her hands. Which means I should go. Today. I can… Where? He said. Where would you go? She didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. Victoria. He leaned forward slightly. Where would you go right now that's safer than here? I'm putting you and Ava in the middle of this. You didn't put us anywhere. I stopped the truck. He waited a beat. And you've got 48 hours before the freeze order. Carver's moving. You stay, you keep working, and we figure out the rest. She looked at him for a long moment. The morning light came through the kitchen window at a low angle and lay across the table between them. She had her hands folded around the prepaid phone, and she was very still. You have a daughter, she said. I know I have a daughter. Noah? I know, he said. The word came out with more weight than before. He knew exactly what she was saying. He sat with it for a moment, the full weight of it, the realness of it, the fact that this was not a hypothetical, and his daughter was 7 years old and upstairs in this house every night. He didn't set it aside, he let it land. And then he said, She's at school for the next 6 hours. Tell me what you need to do in 6 hours. Something in Victoria's face broke open, just slightly, just for a second, in the way of someone who hasn't been argued for in a very long time. Then she picked up the legal pad and got to work. The next several hours moved differently than the days before them. There was a quality to the morning that was harder edged, the ordinary domestic sounds of the house, feeling strange against what was happening at the kitchen table, where Victoria made 4 calls on the prepaid phone and spoke in the clipped, precise language of someone who had shifted entirely into operational mode. Noah listened when he could, not because he was nosy, but because he needed to understand the shape of what was coming. He gathered, from what he could follow, that Carver was coordinating with a federal prosecutor's office in Chicago, that a former Sinclair Global board member, a man named Aldis, who had been pushed out 18 months ago and had apparently been cooperating with investigators since, had provided key documentation, that the sealed indictments covered Webb, Doyle, Rothschild, and 2 others, that the freeze order on the asset transfers could be filed within 24 hours if certain evidentiary conditions were met, and that the documents Victoria had hidden under her wheelchair cushion, the copies she had managed to print at the Cedar Falls Public Library on her second day before she'd told Noah anything, were potentially critical to the fraud case because they contained signatures and timestamps that could corroborate the coercion timeline. They need to be in Carver's hands, Victoria said, after the last call. Physically, today. Can you scan them? She needs originals, or certified copies she can verify in person. She set the phone down. She can send someone, but it will take… I can drive them, Noah said. She looked up. Chicago's about 6 hours round trip. I can be back before Ava's home from school if I leave in the next 30 minutes. I was already thinking through the work orders he'd need to push. The Henderson job could wait. The pressure regulator on the mill equipment was more urgent, but he could move it to tomorrow morning. Is there a location she can send me to? Victoria stared at him. You'd drive 6 hours to hand documents to a federal agent. I'd drive 6 hours to end this faster, he said. There's a difference. She looked at him in the way she had looked at him on the first night in the truck, that assessing, measuring look, except that now it had something else in it. Not calculation, something less guarded than that. Let me call her back, Victoria said. I was on the road by 9:15. The documents were in a sealed envelope in the inside pocket of his work jacket, and he had a name, an address, and a direct number for an agent named Reyes who would meet him in a parking structure off Michigan Avenue. Victoria had written the address on a piece of paper in her dense, precise handwriting. He had it on the seat beside him. Driving alone was a different kind of quiet than the kitchen had been. He had the radio on low, but he wasn't listening to it. He was thinking about the way Victoria had handed him the envelope, with both hands, very carefully, and then had not said anything for a moment, just looked at him. He was thinking about the car that had slowed twice in front of his house. He was thinking about Ava. He pushed that last one back down and drove. What happened in Cedar Falls while he was gone was not something he learned about in real time. Victoria had stayed at the kitchen table with the prepaid phone and her legal pad, working, and for several hours it had been quiet. She had eaten half a sandwich she made herself from what was in the refrigerator, which she noted was understocked in a way that suggested Noah often forgot lunch. She had made more coffee. She had spoken to her lawyer again, and then to Carver, and then spent 45 minutes on the phone with Aldous, the former board member, going through the sequence of events in the 18 months before the crash with the focused intensity of someone reconstructing a crime scene from memory. She was still on the phone when she heard the car. Not passing this time. Stopping. She ended the call without explanation and moved to the front window, staying back from the glass. A black SUV was parked across the street. As she watched, a second one came around the corner and stopped behind it. 4 men got out of the first vehicle, 2 from the second. She recognized one of them from the Thursday meeting, a man who had stood near the door the whole time, not speaking, the kind of man who is brought to meetings for the specific purpose of being large and present. He was large and present now, on Noah Carter's front lawn. She had approximately 90 seconds before they knocked. She used 45 of them to call Carver, say 3 sentences, her location, her situation, the words, "they're here," and end the call. She used the next 30 to move from the window to the kitchen, where she took the prepaid phone and put it in the deep front pocket of her sweatshirt. She used the remaining 15 to position herself in the center of the living room, facing the front door, with her hands in her lap and her back straight and her expression set. The knock, when it came, was not aggressive. That was almost worse. She didn't go to the door, let them knock again. Slower this time, deliberate, patient, the kind of knock that is making a point about how long the person knocking is willing to wait. She went to the door and opened it. The large man from the meeting was not the one who spoke. The one who spoke was shorter, older, in a charcoal coat, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and had sharpened with age into something that passed for distinguished. He had silver at his temples. His name, she knew, was Gerald Price, and he ran the private security division that Marcus Webb had used for the last several years for, as the corporate documents described it, executive risk management. She had hired him once, 3 years ago, to investigate a suspected data breach. "Victoria," he said. His voice was professionally warm. "We've been looking for you." "I know," she said. "Mr. Webb is very concerned. Given your condition and the difficulty you've had since—" "Don't," she said. He paused. The warmth adjusted slightly, recalibrated. "We have a document that needs your signature, a final governance transfer. Once it's filed, everything is clean, everything is settled, and you receive—" "I'm not going to sign it, Victoria. I'm not going to sign it," she said again. Same tone, same register. The voice she used in board meetings when she had already decided something, and the only remaining question was how long the other side was going to spend finding out. "You should leave." Price looked at her for a moment. Then he looked past her into the house, taking in the kitchen table with the legal pad, the 2 coffee cups, the extra chair. "You're staying with someone." "I'm not going to sign it," she said for the 3rd time. He stepped forward. Just slightly. Not into the doorway. Not yet. Just enough to close the distance and make a point about the distance. The large man behind him shifted his weight. "There's a child's bicycle on the porch," Price said. "Is there a child here?" Every muscle in her body tightened, but her face didn't move. "There's no one here," she said. He looked at the bicycle, then back at her. "Tell me where the copies are, Victoria. The ones you printed. You give us those in the signed document, and we're gone. Whatever this is—" He gestured at the house, the ordinary, worn, small house on its ordinary street. "Continues undisturbed. Everyone is safe." "Everyone is safe," she repeated. "That's the goal." She looked at him. She thought about the pilot named Grant Haller with a wife and 2 kids. She thought about the word safe in Price's mouth. "No," she said. He nodded, slowly, the way someone nods when they've been expecting an answer and are now moving to the next step. He looked back at the large man. Something passed between them. Not a word, just a look. a small shift in posture, and the large man moved toward the side of the porch, heading for the side door. Victoria pulled back from the front door and slammed it shut and turned the deadbolt. She moved fast, faster than anyone watching her in the past week might have expected, because she had been careful about what she let people see, and what she didn't let them see was how much of the last 8 months she'd spent learning the exact capabilities and limits of her own body, testing them privately, refusing to accept the first version of what she was told she could or couldn't do. She could move fast when she needed to. She needed to now. She went down the hallway. She checked the back door. Locked. She went to the kitchen window. The large man was crossing the side yard. She called Carver back. "They're inside the perimeter," she said. 6 men, armed probably. "Units are 12 minutes out," Carver said. "Stay in the interior of the house." "There's a girl who comes home from school at 3:15, Victoria said. "She cannot come home to this." "Address of the school?" Victoria didn't know. She knew it was Cedar Falls Elementary because she'd heard Noah mention it, and she knew it was 3 or 4 miles away because of how long Ava was gone in the mornings, and that was the extent of it. "I don't have it," she said. "We'll find it. Stay on the line." She heard the back door handle move, test, release. Then, after a pause, something harder. Not forcing it yet, but checking the integrity, understanding what they were working with. Then the front window broke. Not all the way. Someone had hit it with something blunt to check the resistance, which told her they were still in the assessment phase and hadn't moved to entry yet, which meant Price was still trying to get her to comply before they escalated, which meant she had a narrow window of time and a narrowing one. She went to the front door. "Victoria," Carver said on the phone, "stay away from the perimeter." "They need to think I'm going to negotiate," she said. 12 minutes is too long if they start forcing it." A pause. "Do not open that door." "I'm not going to open it." She raised her voice to carry through the door without opening it. "Price." Silence. Then closer than she'd expected. "I'm here." "I'll look at the document." A beat. "Open the door." "Slide it through," she said. Another pause. The particular quality of silence that is a person thinking. Then she heard footsteps on the porch. She stepped back from the door. The mail slot, a decorative one, not regularly used, the flap slightly rusted, pushed open from the outside, and a folded set of papers was fed through. She took them. Let the flap fall back. She opened the papers on her lap and held the phone to her ear. "Are you reading it?" Carver asked. "Yes." She wasn't, actually. She was watching the time on the prepaid phone. 8 minutes. She looked at the papers. They were what Price had said they were. A governance transfer completion document, requiring her signature on 3 places. "I see it," she said, loudly enough for Price. "Give me a moment." "Take your time," Price said. She could hear the satisfaction in it, the settling in, the sense of resolution arriving, the belief that she had run out of options and was now doing the calculation that led to compliance. He had been dealing with people who ran out of options and complied. He had not been dealing with her. 6 minutes, Carver said quietly. "How did they find us?" Noah's voice. Victoria's chest lurched. It was not Carver. It was Noah, calling on the regular phone, which she'd left on the table, and which Ava must have... Wait. She grabbed the regular phone. "Noah, I'm on my way back. I just talked to Ava's school. They called the house phone because Mrs. Paulson is listed as backup, and she didn't answer. Ava has a fever. They need someone to pick her up." His voice was tight. "What's happening? I called the house and you didn't answer." "There are men outside the house," she said, quietly, fast. 6 of them. Federal agents are 4 minutes out. You cannot bring Ava here." Silence. Just a second of it. Then, "Is anyone inside?" "Not yet." "Can you hold 4 minutes?" "Yes." "Don't do anything that puts you near a door or window." His voice had changed. Not louder, but compressed. The way a voice gets when someone is pushing everything non-essential out of the way and leaving only what's needed. "I'm calling the school right now to tell them to keep Ava inside. I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Noah, 4 minutes, he said. "You can hold 4 minutes." He hung up. She put the regular phone in her other pocket and held the prepaid phone to her ear and looked at the document in her lap and waited. "Victoria," Price said from outside the door. His voice had lost its warmth now. "We've been patient." I know you have, she said. The document, I'm reading it. Silence. Then lower. Don't make this into something it doesn't have to be. She looked at the time. 2 minutes. She thought about Ava in the school office with a fever, waiting for someone to come. She thought about Noah in a truck driving fast from Chicago with an envelope of documents in his jacket that had already been delivered, that were already in the hands of the right people, that had already done what they needed to do. She thought about Carver on the other end of the line, saying 1 minute quietly, just one word and one word. She folded the document. I'm not signing this, she said. A pause. Then, heavy. Open the door, Victoria. No. Then from outside, the sound she had been waiting for. Not police sirens, which she'd half expected, something more immediate and less theatrical, the hard, fast sound of vehicle doors, multiple, slamming in sequence, feet on pavement, a voice loud and flat and carrying no inflection whatsoever. Federal agents, hands where we can see them, do not move. The quality of the air outside the house changed completely. She could feel it even through the walls. The particular stillness that falls over a situation when authority enters and recalibrates everything at once. Carver spoke on the prepaid phone. We're on site. You can open the door when you're ready. She sat still for a moment. Her hands were not shaking. She checked because she'd half expected them to be. They weren't. They were folded in her lap around Gerald Price's governance transfer document, and they were entirely still, and she felt, of all the things she might have felt, an overwhelming and somewhat inconvenient urge to sleep. She opened the front door. The yard was full of federal agents in dark jackets. Price was against the black SUV, hands out, face arranged in the expression of a man deciding very quickly what his attorney would want him to say. The large man from the meeting was face down on the lawn. 3 other men were against the second vehicle. A woman was crossing the yard toward the door. Mid-40s, short brown hair, moving with the no-nonsense stride of someone who had stopped being impressed by chaotic situations a long time ago. She held up an ID badge as she reached the porch. Carver, she said. Victoria Sinclair, Victoria said. They looked at each other for a moment. Carver's eyes moved quickly and professionally over Victoria, the wheelchair, the sweatshirt, the document still folded in her lap, and then back to her face. You all right? Carver asked. Yes. You had them talking for almost 4 minutes. 3 minutes and 50 seconds, Victoria said. But thank you. Something in Carver's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but the suggestion of one, professional and brief. We'll need to debrief you. I know. Inside? Victoria looked at the yard, at Price in his charcoal coat, hands out, his distinguished silver-templed face arranged now in the blank mask of someone calculating outcomes. He caught her looking. She held his gaze for a moment, long enough to let him understand exactly what she thought of every decision he had ever made, and then looked away, because he was no longer the most important thing in her field of vision. She turned back to Carver. Inside is fine. Noah arrived 19 minutes later. She heard the truck before she saw it, that particular engine, which she had gotten used to hearing come and go over the past week, pulling up fast outside and cutting off. She heard his boots on the porch steps. The door opened. He came through fast, moving through the federal agents in his living room with the slightly disoriented expression of a man who had left his house to run an errand and returned to a federal operation, and stopped when he saw her at the kitchen table across from Carver. She looked at him. He looked at her. You're all right, he said. Yes. She held his gaze. She's with Mrs. Paulson. I called on the way. She picked her up from school. He looked around the living room, the agents, the equipment, the general organized disruption of his home, and back at her. What can I do? Carver looked at him. Mr. Carter? Yeah. Thank you for the drive. Carver paused. Agent Reyes said you refused a receipt. I didn't need a receipt, he said. Carver looked at him for a moment in the assessing way of someone deciding whether to say something else. Then she decided not to, and turned back to Victoria. Let's continue. Noah went to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. He did this without asking anyone if they wanted coffee, because there were 6 federal agents in his house, and he was a person who had opinions about hospitality regardless of circumstance. He set cups out on the counter and went and stood against the wall near the kitchen doorway, close enough to hear, and crossed his arms, and waited. Victoria, across the table from Carver, went through everything again: the meeting, the documents, the helicopter, the pilot named Grant Haller, Marcus Webb and his lilies, every detail in the sequence, all the things she had been holding for 8 months and was now finally putting down. She talked for a long time. Carver asked questions. An agent in the corner took notes. Outside, the federal vehicles sat in the street and the neighbors periodically appeared on their porches and went back inside. At some point, without her noticing exactly when, a cup of coffee appeared on the table beside her, black, no comment, set there by a hand that was scarred across the knuckles, and withdrew without ceremony. She wrapped both hands around it and kept talking. Carver and her team were gone by 9 that evening. They took the governance transfer document, Price, and 4 of the 5 other men. The 5th, the one who'd been testing the back door, had provided enough cooperative information during the initial processing that he'd been separated from the others and taken in a different vehicle, which Carver had noted without elaboration. She had shaken Victoria's hand at the door with the same no-nonsense brevity she applied to everything, told her she'd be in touch within 48 hours, glanced at Noah with the expression of someone filing a person away in a particular mental category, and left. The house felt very strange afterward. Noah stood in the middle of his living room and looked at it, the moved furniture, the coffee cups on the counter, the front window with its crack from where someone had tested it with something blunt. The general sense of a space that had been occupied by a great many people with a great many purposes and was now abruptly empty. He had the feeling he sometimes got after major equipment failures at work, when the crisis was over and the adrenaline was burning off, and all that was left was the assessment of damage. Ava was asleep upstairs. Mrs. Paulson had brought her home at 7, dosed with children's fever reducer, and Ava had been too tired and too medicated to fully process the fact that several strangers had apparently been in her house, though she had noticed the cracked window immediately and asked about it with the direct forensic curiosity of a 7-year-old, and Noah had said a bird hit it, and Ava had said that was sad and gone to bed. Victoria was at the kitchen table. She hadn't moved much in the last hour. She'd been on the prepaid phone again, then off it, then sitting with her hands folded on the legal pad in the particular stillness that Noah had come to understand was not emptiness, but the opposite of it, the stillness of a person whose interior was running very fast and whose exterior had learned to show nothing. He went to the kitchen and started cleaning up the coffee cups. "You should sit down," she said. "I'm fine." "You drove 12 hours today." 11 and a half. He turned on the faucet. "And I sat the whole time." She watched him wash the cups. There were 6 of them, 5 from the agents and 1 from her, black, which she'd drunk completely. He stacked them in the drying rack and moved to the counter, wiping it down. "Noah," she said. "Yeah." "Would you sit down?" He put the dishcloth on the counter and sat down across from her. He was tired. He hadn't wanted to admit it while there was still something to do, but there wasn't anything left to do tonight. And the tiredness was now a physical fact that had stopped being deniable. She looked at him across the table. "The freeze order went through 2 hours ago," she said. Carver confirmed it before she left. "The asset transfers Webb had been running. All of it is locked. They can't move anything." "That's good." "The indictments are being unsealed tomorrow morning. Webb, Doyle, Rothschild, Nguyen, and Sauter." She said the names evenly, but her hands, still folded on the legal pad, tightened slightly. "It will be in the news by tomorrow afternoon." "And Sinclair Global?" "The board, the legitimate members who weren't involved, have been notified. My general counsel, the real one, not Nguyen, has been in contact. There will be an emergency session tomorrow to formally invalidate the resignation documents on grounds of coercion and fraud." She paused. "I'll be reinstated as CEO by end of week, probably sooner." He looked at her. She said it the same way she said most things, level, undecorated. But something underneath it was different. Not triumph, something quieter and more complicated than triumph. The way a person sounds when they've gotten back something they'd started to believe was gone permanently, and the getting back is relief and grief and anger all at once, because the losing had left a mark. "That's everything you came here to do," he said. "Yes." "So you'll be going back?" A pause. "Yes. There'll be a great deal to manage. I'll need to be in the Chicago office within a few days, and then Seattle." She looked at the legal pad. I need to find a hotel in Cedar Falls for tonight. I've taken advantage of your... I've been here long enough. He looked at her. It's 9 o'clock. I know. Where are you going to find a hotel at 9 o'clock that has... He gestured, not finishing the sentence because he didn't know exactly how to finish it without it sounding wrong. She knew what he meant. I've managed before, she said. You can stay tonight, he said. One more night isn't going to break anything. She looked at him steadily. You've said that several times now. It keeps being true. Something in her expression moved. That window shadow shift, brief, there and then not. One more night, she said. Yeah. She looked down at the legal pad, then back up. I want to pay you, properly, for the room, for the phone, for the drive to Chicago, for all of it. Victoria, don't say you don't need it. I don't need it. You have a busted water heater, she said. He went still. I heard it the first morning. The pressure knock. She held his gaze. I know what a failing water heater sounds like, Noah. I grew up in a house with 4 of them. Let me pay you. He looked at her for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet. The faucet had a slow drip he'd been meaning to fix. Fine, he said. The water heater. And the window. The water heater. She pressed her lips together, which was as close as she usually got to the expression other people made when they were suppressing a smile. Fine, she said. The water heater. He nodded. Then, because there was nothing left to negotiate, he got up and turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the small bulb above the stove, and said goodnight and went upstairs. She sat in the dim kitchen for a while longer, alone, with her legal pad and the quiet of the house around her. The faucet's slow drip, the furnace's hum, the particular domestic smallness of a place that had somehow held more than it looked like it could. She thought about Seattle, about the office on the 14th floor with the view of the Sound, about the board meetings and the quarterly reviews and the acquisition negotiations and the 12-hour days that had been her entire life for so long that she had stopped being able to see the edges of them. She thought about Ava's stuffed rabbit. She thought about a man who fixed things for a living and asked almost nothing and meant the things he said. She closed the legal pad. She sat for another few minutes. Then she turned herself around in the narrow kitchen and went down the hall to the guest room, and in the dark she lay on her back and listened to the house. And for the first time in 8 months, she fell asleep without planning anything. She was gone when they woke up. Not fully gone. Her chair was still there, pushed against the wall in the hallway, and her legal pad was on the kitchen table, and the prepaid phone was plugged into the charger Noah had set up for it. But she wasn't in the guest room, and she wasn't in the house. Noah found her in the backyard. She had gotten herself out through the back door, and she was sitting near the fence, in the weak November morning light, in the old lawn chair that had been there since summer. Her breath made small clouds in the cold. She had Noah's gray sweatshirt on and a blanket from the guest room across her lap, and she was looking at the dormant garden beds along the fence, the dead stalks, the dark-turned earth, the chicken wire frame he'd put up in spring to keep the rabbits out and never fully taken down. He stood in the doorway and looked at her for a moment. Then he went inside and came back with 2 cups of coffee and picked his way across the frost-stiff grass and held one out. She took it without looking at him. You planted those yourself? He sat down in the other chair, the one with the broken armrest that he kept meaning to fix. Yeah. What did you grow? Tomatoes, peppers, Ava wanted pumpkins. We got 2. He looked at the beds. She named them. Of course she did. Gerald and Susan. A beat. She named her pumpkins Gerald and Susan. Gerald was the bigger one. Susan was kind of lopsided. He drank his coffee. Ava said Susan had character. Something happened in Victoria's face. Not the window shadow this time, but an actual full thing, brief and real. A laugh that came out before she could manage it, quiet and unpolished. Not a social laugh, but the kind that escapes. She put her hand over her mouth and it subsided. And she looked at him with an expression that was, for that moment, entirely uncomplicated. She's something, Victoria said. She really is. He paused. She's going to miss you. Victoria looked at the garden. Her hand around the coffee cup tightened. I know. She told Mrs. Paulson yesterday that you were her friend. On the way home from school. Mrs. Paulson told me. Victoria was quiet for a moment. She's 7. Yeah, 7-year-olds don't have complicated reasons for things. He looked at her. She just likes you. I like her too, Victoria said, and the simplicity of it seemed to cost her something, the admission without qualification or management. She drank her coffee. A bird landed on the fence post, looked at them, and left. I'm not good with children, she said. Generally, I don't know what to do with them. You read to her for 45 minutes. She didn't give me a way out. That's a skill she has. He paused. You were good with her. I watched. She looked at him. You were watching. From the hallway, you knew. I knew. She turned back to the garden. My life hasn't had space for things like that. Children, or domesticity, or... She seemed to run out of language for what she meant and tried a different direction. I made choices, a long time ago, about what mattered and what I'd trade away. And now? She didn't answer immediately. She wrapped both hands around the cup and looked at the dead garden with its chicken wire frame and its 2 empty spots where Gerald and Susan had grown. And now I'm sitting in a broken lawn chair in November drinking coffee in someone else's backyard, she said. And I don't entirely know what to do with that. He didn't say anything. The morning was cold and still. The neighbor's dog barked twice somewhere down the block and went quiet. I'm going to arrange for the water heater, she said after a while. Today, before I leave. I know a contractor in Cedar Falls. I'll have someone here within the week. You know a contractor in Cedar Falls? I know contractors in most mid-sized Iowa cities. It's not a remarkable thing. Right. And the window. She glanced at him. Don't argue. I wasn't going to. She nodded. The morning light was getting slightly stronger, the gray thinning at the edges. From upstairs, faint and distant, came the first sound of Ava moving around. The thud of small feet hitting the floor, the creak of the hallway floorboard. She's up, Noah said. I know. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Victoria turned her chair and headed for the back door, and Noah picked up both coffee cups and followed, and the morning moved forward the way mornings do, regardless of what else is happening. The next 3 months were not a clean story. Clean stories required continuous narrative, a problem, a resolution, a clear line between them. What actually happened was more like weather, pressure systems moving through, some days clear and some not, change occurring at a pace that felt both too slow and, in retrospect, faster than it seemed. Victoria left Cedar Falls on a Tuesday morning in a car arranged by her legal team, a real car this time, with a real driver, and her own phone restored, and a set of clothes that weren't a borrowed sweatshirt. Ava came downstairs and gave her a drawing she'd made the night before, a picture of 2 people in a wheelchair and what appeared to be a very large yellow thing that could have been either a sun or an explosion, and which Ava described as the bus stop at night. Victoria had looked at the drawing for a long moment. Can I keep this? She asked. Yes, Ava said. I made it for you. Victoria folded it carefully and put it in the bag her legal team had brought. Ava then hugged her around the middle, pressing her face into the sweatshirt. Still the gray one, Victoria hadn't asked for something different, and Victoria's hand came up and rested on Ava's head, very lightly, briefly, before Ava stepped back with the easy grace of a child who gives affection without needing to make it significant. Noah walked her out to the car. The driver loaded the bag. The morning was cold, clear, the 1st of November. She turned to him in the driveway. They were approximately 3 feet apart, which was the distance they'd maintained, more or less, for the entire 10 days. And it was a distance that had never felt awkward and also had never felt entirely right. Thank you, she said. He nodded. I mean it. I know you do. He looked at her. Take care of yourself. You too. She turned to the car. He opened the door, just reached past and got it before the driver could, not thinking about it, just doing it. And she got in and the door closed and the car pulled out, and he stood in the driveway watching it go until it turned the corner. Then he went inside and fixed the dripping faucet. Marcus Webb was arrested on a Wednesday morning outside his home in Evanston, Illinois, while he was getting into his car to go to a board meeting that no longer involved him in any capacity. The footage was on every financial news network by noon. He had no comment. His attorney had several, none of which were particularly useful. Philip Doyle was taken into custody the same morning at O'Hare, attempting to board a flight to Zurich with luggage that exceeded what is typically packed for a short business trip. David Sauter was found at a rental property in Florida. Rothschild surrendered through his attorney. Carla Nguyen cooperated from the moment the agents arrived at her door, which Carver told Victoria later had been predictable. She had always been the weakest link, in the sense of being the one whose involvement required the most justification and offered the least personal benefit and therefore held together with the thinnest wire. The trials would take time, federal cases always did. But the indictments were solid, the documentation was solid, and the cooperation from Nguyen and from Aldis, the former board member, filled gaps that might otherwise have required years of litigation. Sinclair Global held its emergency board session on the Thursday of that same week. Victoria attended via video from a hotel conference room in Chicago because she wasn't yet in Seattle, because there were 17 things that needed to happen in Chicago first, and she was working through them in order. The session lasted 4 hours. At the end of it, the voluntary resignation documents were formally invalidated. The proxy assignment was voided, and Victoria Sinclair was reinstated as chairman and CEO of Sinclair Global by a vote of 9-2, the two dissenting votes being board members who had not been involved in the conspiracy, but who had, Victoria noted, also not been particularly proactive in questioning it, and whose positions on the board she was already considering with some care. She called Noah that evening. She hadn't planned to. She had a list of 14 calls to make, and his name was not on it. But she'd finished the 13th and sat in the hotel room with the list on her knee and the city lights outside the window, and had picked up the phone. He answered on the third ring. "Hey," he said. "Webb was arrested this morning," she said. "I thought you'd want to know." "I saw it on the news." A pause. She could hear the television in the background, low. "You doing okay?" "I'm reinstated, effective today." "That's good. That's... Yeah, good." He sounded like he meant it, without ceremony. "How do you feel?" She thought about it. Sitting in a hotel room in Chicago with a city view she was barely seeing and a list of 14 calls on her knee. "Like there's a great deal of work to do," she said. "That's not what I asked." She was quiet for a moment. "Strange," she said. "I feel strange. I thought I'd feel... I don't know what I thought I'd feel. More certain about something. That's probably normal. I don't have a lot of basis for comparison. No, I mean..." A pause. "You spent 8 months fighting to get back to something, and now you're back. And the thing you get back to is never exactly the same as the thing you were fighting for, because you're different now." He stopped. "Sorry. That's..." "No," she said. "That's exactly it." The line was quiet for a moment. Not awkward quiet, the other kind. "Ava drew another picture," he said, "of the pumpkins. She's decided Gerald and Susan are coming back in the spring." "They're annuals," Victoria said. "She'd have to replant." "I know. I didn't tell her that." "She'll figure it out." "Yeah, she always does." He paused. "She asked if you were coming back." Victoria looked at the city lights outside the window. She didn't answer for a moment. "What did you tell her?" "I said I didn't know." A pause. "Which is the truth." "Yes," Victoria said. "It is." Another moment of quiet. Outside her window, a siren went past and faded. "How's the water heater?" she said. "Got installed last week. Works great." A pause. "I have to admit, it's genuinely nice." "Hot water generally is." "You didn't have to do it. You did the window too." "I know." "Victoria." "I know," she said. "Let me have it." He let her have it. She could hear the quiet smile in the silence. They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing particularly important. She told him about the board session. He told her about a combine engine he'd spent the week working on that had turned out to have a cracked cylinder head that someone had been papering over for 3 seasons with increasingly desperate mechanical improvisation. She found herself laughing at the way he described the final reveal. Not the performed laugh, but the real one, the one that came without warning. When she hung up, she sat in the hotel room for a while in the dark, not doing anything on the list. Then she picked up the phone and made call 410. The neurologist's name was Dr. Andrea Fisk, and she worked out of Northwestern Memorial in Chicago, and she had a reputation for being direct to the point of bluntness, and for having opinions about spinal cord injury recovery that were considered aggressive by more conservative practitioners and increasingly supported by emerging research. Victoria had known about her for 4 months and had not made the appointment because making the appointment meant having the conversation, and having the conversation meant hearing what was possible and what wasn't. And for 4 months, she had managed the not knowing by not asking. She made the appointment the week after her reinstatement. Dr. Fisk was exactly as advertised. She was in her late 40s, wore no-nonsense glasses, and had the manner of someone who had spent 20 years talking to people in difficult situations and had learned that what they needed most was accuracy rather than comfort. Not because comfort was unimportant, but because accuracy, in her experience, was what actually allowed people to move forward. She reviewed Victoria's imaging and her surgical records and her rehabilitation history for 2 full days before the consultation. When Victoria sat across from her in the consultation room, Dr. Fisk put the file down and looked at her directly. "Your injury is a partial," she said. "TOEVN, incomplete, which you know. The initial prognosis you received was conservative, which is appropriate in the acute phase. You've done 8 months of standard rehabilitation, which is also appropriate." She folded her hands on the file. "Here's what I think. There is residual neural pathway function in your lower extremities that has not been adequately targeted. There are 3 reasons this happens. The standard rehabilitation protocol doesn't reach it, the patient doesn't have access to the specialized equipment required, or nobody has pushed hard enough." She looked at Victoria. "In your case, all 3. Victoria held her gaze. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your case is not closed." Dr. Fisk leaned forward slightly. "I'm not promising you'll walk. I want to be completely clear about that. What I'm saying is that the door has not been shut and locked the way you may have been told. I've seen incomplete injuries at your level with similar imaging respond to aggressive targeted therapy in ways that standard prognosis would not have predicted." Victoria sat very still. She had not moved since Dr. Fisk had said your case is not closed. Something in her chest was doing something complicated that she was not going to examine closely in this room. "What does aggressive targeted therapy mean, specifically?" she said. "Epidural stimulation, intensive locomotor training, a program over 6 to 9 months that will be, frankly, harder than anything you've done in rehabilitation so far. And you will have to be there every day and do the work." Dr. Fisk's eyes were steady. "And the results may be limited. Partial return of sensation, some motor function, or it may be more than that. I cannot tell you exactly where this ends. I can tell you it has a better chance than doing nothing." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Outside the consultation room, the hospital made its hospital sounds, distant, neutral, constant. "When can we start?" she said. Dr. Fisk looked at her for a moment. Then she opened the file. "I have a slot on the 15th. I'll take it." The therapy was brutal. There was no softer word for it, and Victoria didn't look for one. It was 5 days a week, 3 hours a day, and it was physically painful in the specific way that comes from forcing a nervous system to attempt things. It had been failing at for months. Not the sharp pain of injury, but the grinding, exhausting, deeply demoralizing pain of effort that produces almost no visible result and requires you to show up and try again anyway. She ran Sinclair Global from a tablet between sessions. She took calls in the car on the way to Northwestern. She held board meetings over video while she had electrodes taped to her back. Her assistant, a young man named Terrence, who had been with her for 3 years, and who had spent the previous 9 months being quietly furious on her behalf, managed the logistics of her day with the dedicated competence of someone who had been waiting for her return the way a machine waits to be switched back on. The first 6 weeks produced nothing visible. She felt things, faint, unreliable signals, the ghost of sensation in her left thigh, a warmth along the outside of her right calf that came and went, but she could not have proven to anyone that these were real rather than wishful. She told no one. She went to therapy and went to work and called Noah on Thursday evenings, which had become a thing that happened without either of them formally deciding it would. The calls were 20 minutes to an hour, depending on what was happening in their respective weeks, and they covered work and Ava and the Combine engine and the board reconstitution at Sinclair and the ongoing federal trial proceedings, and Gerald and Susan's planned successors, which Ava had already named Carl and Marguerite. She did not tell him about the therapy on the first call, or the second, or the third. She wasn't ready for it to be a thing other people were watching. On the 7th Thursday call, she told him, "I've been doing a rehabilitation program," she said, "at Northwestern, advanced, since the 2nd week of November." A pause. "Okay. It's targeting neural pathways that weren't addressed in standard rehab. Is it working?" She sat with that for a moment. She was in her apartment, the Chicago one, not Seattle. She'd been in Chicago more than Seattle lately. And it was late, the city outside the window dark and glittering. "I don't know yet," she said, "but you're doing it." "Yes." "Why didn't you say earlier?" She thought about it honestly. "Because I didn't want to have said it and then have nothing to show for it." A pause. "That's not how it works," he said. "You don't have to show anything." "I know that intellectually. But I have spent a long time in rooms where what you show matters more than what you're actually doing." She paused. "Old habit." "Yeah," he said, not dismissively, just acknowledging it. "Last week," she said, "I moved my left foot." The line was quiet. "Not much," she said. "About half an inch. Dr. Fisk had me in the parallel bars and I was trying to shift my weight and my left foot moved." She stopped, steadied. "I cried. I was in a medical facility with 3 therapists watching and I cried like an idiot." "That's not idiotic," he said. "I know. It didn't feel like it at the time." She looked at the city lights. It felt like everything. He didn't say anything for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. "Half an inch." "Half an inch? That's not nothing." "No," she said, "it's not nothing." The night outside her window was clear, the kind of December clear that comes with cold and makes the lights sharper. She sat with the phone against her ear and something in her chest that she had been carrying for 8 months, dense and cold and settled, the weight of a thing she had stopped expecting to move, shifted, just slightly, the way frozen ground shifts when the temperature finally turns. "Ava's going to lose her mind," Noah said. Victoria laughed. "The real one, the unmanaged one." "Don't tell her yet." "I won't, but she's going to." "I know," Victoria said. And for the first time in a very long time, she found she was actually looking forward to that. The half inch became an inch. The inch became the ability to flex her ankle against resistance, which Dr. Fisk documented with the restrained satisfaction of someone who had been right about something important and was too professional to say "I told you so," but was clearly thinking it. Then came sensation, actual, reliable sensation, not the ghost warmth she'd felt in those early weeks, but real feeling, the kind you could map and measure, the outside of her right calf first, then the left thigh, then slowly, unevenly, like a power grid coming back on after a long outage, section by section across her lower body. It was not comfortable. Returning sensation in a damaged nervous system is not the soft cinematic experience of feeling rushing back like warm water. It was pins and needles at 3 in the morning. It was her legs waking her up with signals that her brain didn't know how to categorize yet. It was 2 weeks in February where everything below her waist felt like it was being held against a low electrical current. Not painful exactly, but constant and deeply strange. And she lay in bed at night and breathed through it the way Dr. Fisk had told her to breathe through it. And in the morning, she went back to the parallel bars and kept going. She told almost no one. Terrence knew, because Terrence managed her schedule, and her schedule was built around therapy. Dr. Fisk knew, obviously. Carver knew, because they'd had lunch in January, and Victoria had mentioned it with the brevity she applied to personal information. A sentence, accurate, no elaboration offered. And Noah knew, because of the Thursday calls. Those calls had become the fixed point of her week, in a way she hadn't planned and didn't fully examine. Not because she was avoiding the examination, exactly, but because some things function better when you let them exist without pulling them apart to see what they're made of. She had spent her entire career pulling things apart. She knew how to do it. She also knew that not everything was improved by the process. He told her things about his week without being asked, the jobs, the equipment, the particular mechanical disasters that seemed to find him with regularity. He had a way of describing frustrating situations that was wry without being theatrical about it, and she found herself genuinely looking forward to whatever had gone wrong with what piece of machinery and what improvised solution had or hadn't worked. She was not a person who had ever found other people's ordinary days interesting. She found his interesting. She wasn't sure what to do with that, so she kept showing up for the calls and let it be what it was. In February, he told her that Ava had lost her first tooth and had strong opinions about the tooth fairy's going rate, which she had apparently researched. How a 7-year-old had researched tooth fairy economics was unclear, but Ava was the kind of child who found ways, and had submitted a formal case to Noah involving a hand-drawn graph. Victoria laughed until her eyes watered. She asked to see the graph. He took a photo and sent it. She looked at it for a long time, The crayon bars, the earnest labeling, the conclusion underlined 3 times in red, and felt something that was warm and specific and located somewhere in the vicinity of her sternum. She put the photo in a folder on her phone. She did not examine why. The trial of Marcus Webb and the other 4 defendants began in March, in a federal courtroom in Chicago, and was not the dramatic public spectacle some of the financial media had hoped for. Federal fraud trials are, by nature, document-heavy and procedurally dense, and the press, which had initially covered the arrests with significant intensity, settled into the kind of coverage that consists of daily summaries and occasional courtroom sketches. Victoria testified on the 4th day. She had prepared for this with the same methodical attention she brought to major board presentations, understanding what was needed, organizing the information, managing the delivery. She was not nervous in the conventional sense. She had testified before regulatory bodies, spoken to congressional committees, done things that required precision and composure under much more uncertain conditions than a federal courtroom where the documentation was already solid and the outcome was not particularly in doubt. What she had not prepared for, and what she could not have prepared for, was seeing Marcus Webb's face when she was sworn in. He was at the defense table 20 feet away, and he was looking at her, and his expression was the expression of a man who had genuinely believed she would not be sitting in that chair. Not because he had underestimated her intelligence or her capability, he had known both for 8 years, but because he had looked at a woman in a wheelchair, 8 months into a spinal cord injury, alone and stripped of resources and left at a bus stop in the rain, and made a calculation about what a person in that position could accomplish. And the calculation had been wrong, and sitting 20 feet away in a federal courtroom was the proof of it. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned to the prosecutor and answered the first question. She testified for 2.5 hours. She was accurate, she was detailed, and she did not editorialize. She described the meeting, the documents, the bus stop. She described the helicopter crash in the Cascades and what she had known and not known at the time. She described 8 months of recovery during which her company was being systematically stolen by people she had trusted, and she described it without heat, because heat was not what the record needed, and because she had learned over a career of difficult rooms that the most devastating testimony is testimony that doesn't need to perform its own devastation. When she was done, she left the courtroom and sat in the hallway on a bench outside the doors and was quiet for a while. Terrence, who had been in the gallery, came out and sat beside her. He didn't say anything for a moment. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "You want coffee?" "Please." He went. She sat in the hallway and listened to the building's institutional hum and thought about Grant Haller, whose name she had said aloud in the courtroom, and who would not hear it said. He had been 38 years old. His wife had attended every day of the trial and sat in the second row and had nodded at Victoria once, on the first day, when they passed in the corridor. A small, precise nod, the kind that contains a great deal but cannot hold all of it. Victoria had nodded back. She would make sure Grant Haller's name was in the record. She had already spoken to the prosecutor about it. His death would not be a footnote. The verdicts came in 6 weeks later. Webb, guilty on 11 counts. Doyle, guilty on 8. Rothschild, guilty on 6. Sauter, guilty on 9. Nguyen, whose cooperation had earned her a reduced charge agreement, pled guilty to 2 counts and received a sentence that reflected the assistance she had provided, which Carver had called proportionate and which Victoria had privately called insufficient, but had not contested, because contesting it would have cost more than it was worth, and she was done spending energy on things that didn't move. She called Noah from the car on the way back from the courthouse. "It's done," she said. She could hear him exhale. Not a dramatic breath, just a real one, the kind that comes when something that's been sitting on your chest for a while finally shifts. "All of them?" "All of them." "Webb?" 11 counts. A pause. "Good," he said. "Just that. Good." Flat and certain and meaning exactly what it said. "I thought so too," she said. She came back to Cedar Falls in April. This was not a spontaneous decision. She had been thinking about it since February, when Dr. Fisk had told her that the timeline for the next phase of therapy would allow for more flexibility in her schedule, that the intensive daily sessions were transitioning to a 3-day-a-week format as the work shifted from stimulation to consolidation to letting the nervous system integrate what it had been learning and practice it under more real-world conditions. real-world conditions. She had thought about that phrase for a week before she called Noah. "I want to come back," she said on a Thursday evening in late March, "for a few days. If that's—" Ava isn't in the middle of something. A pause. Ava is always in the middle of something. I know what you meant. Another pause. Shorter. "Come whenever you want." She drove up on a Friday afternoon in a rented car, which she drove herself, which she had not done in over a year, and which was its own kind of thing. The reclaiming of a small, ordinary autonomy that she had not realized she'd missed until she had it back. The drive from Chicago to Cedar Falls took about 4 hours, and she did not take any calls. She listened to the radio and watched the flat spring landscape of Iowa open out around her and felt, which was still sometimes surprising to her in its own quiet way, the pressure of her right foot on the accelerator. She found the house the same way she'd first found it, in the half-dark of early evening, the porch light on, the window boxes already replanted with something green and new. She sat in the car in the driveway for a moment before getting out. The front door opened before she reached the porch steps. Ava came out at a speed that suggested she had been watching for the car, which she probably had, and came down the steps in the particular way that children descend steps when they are moving at maximum velocity and the steps are an obstacle rather than a route, nearly sideways, both hands briefly on the railing, and stopped in front of Victoria with the expression of someone who had been waiting a specific amount of time and was now prepared to account for all of it. "You've been gone 5 months," Ava said. "I know. That's a long time." "It is." "Dad said you were busy." "I was busy." Ava looked at her with the 7-year-old forensic assessment that Victoria had not forgotten and had, she realized, been looking forward to more than most things. "You look different," Ava said. "Different how?" Ava considered this seriously. "I don't know. Better different." She tilted her head. "Did something happen?" "Some things happened, yes." "Good things?" Victoria looked at her. "Yes," she said. "Good things." Ava processed this, found it acceptable, and then said, "Do you want to see Carl and Marguerite? They're not big yet, but they're growing." "I very much want to see Carl and Marguerite." Ava took her hand, not asking, just taking it, the way children take hands when they've decided the hand is available, and led her around the side of the house toward the backyard, and Victoria let herself be led. Noah was standing at the back fence where the garden beds were, in the fading April light, and he turned when he heard them coming. He was wearing a work jacket with a tear on the left shoulder that she was certain had been there in October, and his hands were dirty, and he had apparently been doing something with the chicken wire frame along the fence. He looked at her, she looked at him. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said. Neither of them said anything else for a moment. Ava, oblivious to whatever was happening between the two adults, pulled Victoria toward the garden bed and pointed at 2 small green shoots, barely an inch tall, pushing up through the dark turned earth. "Carl," Ava said, pointing to the left one. "Marguerite." The right. She looked up at Victoria. "Carl is already bigger, which I think is unfair to Marguerite, but Dad says plants aren't fair." "Your dad is right," Victoria said, "but Marguerite might catch up." "Do you think so?" Victoria looked at the small, struggling shoot in the cold spring soil. "Yes," she said. "I think she has a good chance." She stayed 4 days. They were ordinary days, mostly, in the way that days become ordinary when you stop treating them as transactions and just let them be what they are. She worked in the mornings at the kitchen table while Ava was at school. Sinclair Global required her attention in some form every day, and always would, and she had accepted that this was simply the texture of her life, the way other people accepted commutes or early mornings. Noah was out on jobs. The house had the specific quiet of a place where people live and work and move through without staging it for observation. She drove to the physical therapy center in Des Moines on Saturday morning. Dr. Fisk had arranged it, a facility she worked with, and spent 2 hours there and drove herself back, and stopped for lunch at a diner on Route 9 that she'd passed a dozen times in October and never gone into. She sat at a table by the window and ordered coffee and a sandwich and looked out at the Iowa highway, which was flat and ordinary and going in both directions, and she thought about the version of herself that had sat at a bus stop 200 yards from here in the rain 8 months ago, stripped of everything she'd built, waiting for a car that was never coming. She thought about what that woman had believed about herself, and what she had been wrong about, and what she had been right about. She had been right that she wasn't finished, wrong about what not being finished would look like. She had imagined it as a straight line, get back to Sinclair, restore what was taken, return to the life she had before, pick up where the helicopter had dropped her. She had not imagined the rest of it. The guest room, the girl with the stuffed rabbit, the man who asked almost nothing and meant everything he said, the half-inch that became an inch that became her foot pressing an accelerator on a highway in April. She had not imagined that the interruption would turn out to be the point. She paid for her lunch and drove back to Cedar Falls. On Sunday evening, her last night, Noah made dinner. Nothing elaborate, pasta and a salad and garlic bread that Ava ate 3 pieces of, and argued there should be a 4th piece rule implemented going forward. They ate at the kitchen table the way they had eaten every other meal in this house, without arrangement or ceremony, and afterward Ava fell asleep on the couch watching television, and Noah covered her with a blanket, and they sat in the kitchen with the remains of the wine he'd opened, and it was very quiet. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said. He looked at her across the table. She had been thinking about how to say this for 2 months. She had composed versions of it in her head during therapy sessions, during long conference calls, during the drives back from Northwestern. Every version she had constructed was too precise, too managed, too much like a board presentation. So she abandoned all of them and said it the way things actually get said, which is imperfectly and without the right words and meaning it anyway. "I've spent my entire adult life in a specific kind of room," she said. "Boardrooms, negotiating rooms, conference rooms, rooms where everything you say is calibrated and everything you give away has a cost. I've been good at it. I think I'm still good at it." She paused. "But I had entirely forgotten that other rooms exist." He was watching her, not moving. "This kitchen," she said, "is the other kind of room." She looked at her hands on the table. "You are the other kind of room." She stopped, looked up. "That is probably the least articulate thing I've ever said to another person." "I understood it," he said. "I know you did. That's part of the problem." He looked at her. A small line appeared between his brows. Not confusion, something else. The look of a person being very careful. "Victoria, I'm not asking you for anything," she said quickly. "I want to be clear about that. I know what your life is and I know what my life is, and they're very different. I know that. I just..." She stopped, steadied. "I wanted to say it because I spent 8 months not saying things I should have said, and I've decided I'm done doing that." The kitchen was very quiet. The clock on the microwave made its small advance. Noah looked at her for a long moment, in the particular way he looked at things he was actually thinking about. Not the looking at you while you talk look, but the real one, the one that went somewhere. "My life," he said, "is not as fixed as you seem to think it is." She looked at him. "I fix equipment for a living," he said. "I can do that from a lot of places." He paused. "That's not what I'm saying exactly. I'm saying the thing you said about different rooms." He turned his coffee cup on the table, a slow circle. "I've been in the same rooms for 4 years since Ellen died. I just stayed in them because staying felt safer than going anywhere. And I told myself that was about Ava, but Ava is 7, and she would be fine in most rooms." He looked up. "You're not the only one who forgot the other kind existed." Victoria was very still. "I'm not asking you for anything either," he said. "I'm just saying, both of us figuring out what we're saying seems like a reasonable thing to take some time with." "Yes," she said. "It does. So take some time with it. And I'll be here on Thursday," he said. She looked at him across the kitchen table in the small warm light of the stove bulb and felt something settle in her chest that she did not have a precise word for, which was new for her because she had a precise word for most things. "Thursday," she said. He nodded. Ava made a sound from the couch in the other room. A small sleep sound, a shift, and then quiet again. They both listened to it, and neither of them moved, and the house held them the way it held everything, without making a big deal of it, without asking anything back. The Sinclair Hope Foundation was incorporated in May. Victoria announced it at the Sinclair Global Annual Shareholder Meeting at the end of her prepared remarks, after the quarterly results and the strategic outlook and the detailed response to questions about the company's governance reforms, all of which were strong, all of which she delivered with the precision and authority of a woman who had spent 12 years building something and was not done building it. Then she set aside the prepared remarks and spoke without notes for approximately 6 minutes. She talked about a bus stop on Route 9 outside Cedar Falls, Iowa. She did not describe it as a low point or a turning point or any of the other narrative labels people reach for when describing difficult experiences. She described it as a night when something she had stopped believing was possible turned out to be possible, which was a stranger stopping. She said that the foundation would provide emergency transportation, temporary housing, and access to rehabilitation services for people with physical disabilities who found themselves in crisis, financial, personal, legal, or otherwise, and had no infrastructure around them to catch the fall. She said it would not be a charity in the conventional sense, because she had seen from the inside what it felt like to need something practical and be offered something symbolic, and she was not interested in symbolism. She was interested in the gap between where someone was and where they needed to get to, and in building something that could bridge it. She said that the foundation was named for the idea of hope, which she had historically found to be a soft word used to avoid committing to concrete action, and she intended to make it less soft. The room was quiet in a way that rooms full of shareholders are not usually quiet. Then she thanked them for their time and took her next question. The calls that came in the following week from people in disability advocacy, from journalists, from other executives, from a woman named Helena Haller, who identified herself as the widow of Grant Haller, and whose voice on the phone was so carefully controlled it nearly broke Victoria entirely. Those calls were more than she had expected, and she was someone who planned for more than she expected. She handled all of them. She had help. Terrence, her general counsel, a newly assembled foundation board that she had selected with the same ruthless care she applied to every board she'd ever sat on. She was not naive about the complexity of what she was building. Complexity was familiar terrain. What was less familiar was what happened when she called Noah that Thursday and told him about the shareholder meeting and the foundation announcement, and after she'd finished, he was quiet for a moment and then said, "I'm proud of you." And she had to stop talking for a moment because no one had said that to her in a very long time, not in that plain and uncomplicated way, not in a way that wasn't attached to something else. "Thank you," she said. Did it feel right? Saying it out loud like that? She thought about standing at the podium with 6 minutes of unscripted remarks in front of 400 shareholders. "Yes," she said. "Terrifying, but yes. Good things usually are." Ava said that. She says it constantly. She got it from a book about a mouse who wants to be an engineer. Victoria pressed her lips together hard against the laugh. She was in her office. She was supposed to be on a call in 4 minutes. Tell her I cited her. She'll charge you royalties. They were married the following October. The ceremony was small, 30 people, at Noah's house, because Ava had been specifically clear that it needed to be at the house where the story started, and neither of the adults in question had been prepared to argue with this logic because it was objectively correct. The backyard had been cleaned up, and there were lights strung along the fence, and Carl and Marguerite's successors had come and gone by then, but the garden beds were turned for spring, and the chicken wire frame was still there, which Noah had kept for reasons that were partly practical and mostly not. Mrs. Paulson cried. Terrence did not cry but was seen to blink more than usual. Carver attended and stood near the back with her arms crossed and the expression of someone who found the occasion appropriate and had no notes. Ava wore a dress that was green because green was her current definitive favorite color, which it had been for 3 months and would probably not be in another 3, but it was October, and green was correct for October, and she carried a small bunch of whatever flowers Noah had found at the market that morning, which were slightly improbable for the season and therefore perfect. She walked beside Victoria. This was Ava's idea, delivered as a statement rather than a request, which was how Ava generally delivered her best ideas. She would walk next to Victoria. Not in front, not behind. Next to. Because that was how people walked when they were doing something together. Noah stood at the other end of the yard near the fence, in a jacket that fit him properly because Victoria had quietly replaced the one with the torn shoulder, and watched them come toward him. Victoria walked with 2 canes. She had been walking with 2 canes for 3 months. Short distances, uneven ground required more care, and there were days that were better and days that were less good, because that was the honest nature of it, and she had made her peace with the honest nature of it a long time ago. Dr. Fisk called her progress exceptional. Victoria called it work. They were both right. The yard wasn't long. 20 steps, maybe 25. She took them one at a time, Ava's small, warm presence beside her, the October light coming through the trees at the angle it always does in fall, low and amber, and making everything it touches look briefly like it matters more than usual. Noah was watching her and she was watching him, and neither of them was trying to hold a particular expression. Whatever was on their faces was just what was there. She reached him. He took her hand, both hands, folding the canes under his arm without a word, just taking her hands in the scarred, careful way of someone who fixes things for a living and understands that some things require you to be gentle without making a performance of the gentleness. Ava inserted herself between them with the complete lack of self-consciousness that was one of her finest qualities, took one of each of their hands, and looked up at the person officiating with the focused expression of someone who had been waiting for this part to begin. "Okay," she said. "You can start." There is a version of this story where the point is the helicopter crash, or the stolen company, or the courtroom, or the moment Victoria's foot moved half an inch in the parallel bars. Those things happened, and they mattered, and they changed what came after. But the real center of it, the part that everything else radiates out from, is a man on a rainy highway who saw a shape at the edge of his headlights and slowed down. He didn't know what was in the wheelchair. He didn't know about the $4 billion, or the corrupt executives, or the helicopter, or the pilot named Grant Haller. He knew there was a person sitting in the rain at a bus stop where the last bus had already left, and he pulled over. People will tell you that kindness is simple. It isn't, particularly. It requires you to interrupt something, your route, your evening, your certainty that what's in front of you is someone else's problem. It requires you to take on a little weight that wasn't yours to begin with, not knowing if it will turn out to be a little weight or a great deal of weight. Noah didn't know what he was picking up when he got out of that truck. He couldn't have known. He got out anyway. Victoria will tell you, and she has told it in an interview she gave to a journalist working on a piece about the foundation, in which she was more candid than she usually allowed herself to be, that the hardest thing about the months after the crash was not the physical pain or the legal fight or the fear. The hardest thing was losing her belief that the world contained people who would stop. She had been in business long enough and had been betrayed thoroughly enough that she had quietly filed that belief away as naive, something she had believed once and grown out of. The night at the bus stop, she found out she'd been wrong. She has said that it reoriented something fundamental in how she operated after that, not in a simple inspirational way, not in the way of a lesson that fits on a card, in the more complicated way of having to revise a working assumption that had been load-bearing for a long time, and finding that the revision made everything else harder to calculate, but truer to the actual shape of things. Noah would tell you, if you asked him, and if he was in a mood to talk about it, which is not a given, because he is not a man who reaches for the large statement when the small true one is available, that he didn't do anything particularly remarkable. He pulled over. He made eggs. He drove to Chicago. He fixed the things he knew how to fix and left the things he couldn't fix for the people who could. He would say that Ava could tell you the rest better than he could. Ava, who is 8 now, would tell you about Gerald and Susan, and about Carl and Marguerite, and about the year she had 2 parents again without anyone making a formal announcement about it. It just sort of accumulated, the way good things sometimes do. In small increments you don't notice individually until one day you look up, and there it is, more than you planned for. She would tell you that Victoria still calls the tooth fairy going rate arbitrary and continues to believe the subject deserves more rigorous analysis. She would tell you that her dad still fixes things in the garage at night, and her mom goes out there sometimes and sits in the doorway, and they don't always talk much, and that's fine, because some quiet is the good kind. She would tell you, if you asked what she thought the whole story was about, that it was about stopping. Not stopping as in giving up. Stopping as in the truck, the headlights, the shape at the edge of the road. The moment when you have somewhere to be and you see something and you could keep going and you don't. She learned that from her dad, she would say. He stopped. And that turned out to be the whole thing.